Do you love taking pictures with your cell phone, but would like to turn your photography up a notch and buy a more serious camera? Well, in this edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus, I'm going to explain why I think you should start with a digital camera. And the digital camera I recommend is the Nikon D700. Now, many photographers would recommend you start with a film camera. Now, when I started in photography back in the early 70s, I had no choice. There were only film cameras. And you could pick up a film camera today for under $100. So why do I suggest that you buy a Nikon D700, a digital single lens reflex camera that sells for under $400? Well, the main reason why I would suggest any digital camera is the fact that you see your results immediately on the rear LCD. You don't have to wait to have your film develop. You see if you made a mistake and you could correct it right then and there. I think that is a huge advantage. When I started out shooting film and I started out shooting black and white, I had a darkroom at home, a little darkroom, a very simple setup. But if I shot some pictures, I was out shooting pictures, I would come home, process the film, and I would see my results. And sometimes there were mistakes made, and I wish I had the ability to know that when I shot the pictures. I was just learning and I made mistakes, as we all do when we're first learning something. So if I messed up, I'd have to go back and reshoot. Well, with a digital camera, you immediately see your results. You get that instant feedback, and if you need to shoot at a different aperture for more depth of field, if you need to shoot at a faster shutter speed to stop action, if your exposure was off, well, you see that immediately and you can make corrections. Also, looking at the back of the LCD, you might decide, oh, my composition really isn't good with this. Maybe I should get closer or further away or shoot at a different angle. You get that instant feedback, which I think is invaluable, especially to a beginner. Now, another big advantage to digital, and again, this applies to any digital camera, is that as you shoot each image, all of your settings are recorded in the digital file along with the image. So when you go back and review your pictures, you can see what your aperture was, what your shutter speed was, your ISO setting on the camera, whether or not you use flash, and several other items. Now, when I was starting out and I was testing a film or a lens or just trying to understand everything, I would keep notes. I would take a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper and frame number 1, f8 at a 500th of a second, the lens I used, if I used any flash or whatever, I would put that all down on paper. So it took time, but it enabled me, when I reviewed my images later after the film was processed, to know how each image was shot. So with a digital camera, you don't have to do that. It's all right there, stored with each image, and you could view that information either on the back of the camera or on your computer when you're reviewing your files. Now, another advantage of starting with digital is cost. Yes, the camera is more expensive, much more expensive usually. However, once you have the camera, you have no other cost. It doesn't cost you anything to take hundreds, thousands of pictures. With film, you got the cost of the film. A roll of 36 exposure, 400 speed black and white film today costs around $10. You also need processing. You may need to have that film scanned. It all adds to the cost. Now, if you have a darkroom, you can develop the film yourself and make your own prints, but most people don't do that today. So it is much more expensive in the long run to shoot film. And you're going to make mistakes when you're starting out. So that's another reason why I really think it's beneficial to shoot digital. Now, I love film. In fact, recently, I've kind of gotten back into it. I set up a darkroom so I can make my own black and white prints. And I suggest once you learn on digital, maybe get into film. Okay, there are so many digital cameras on the used market. Why do I suggest the D700? First of all, it's a full frame camera. And what that means is that the sensor on the D700 is the same size as a frame of 35mm film. So your lenses will give you the same angle of view on the digital camera, on the D700, as they would on a 35mm camera. And I think that's good for starters for someone. If you took a 50mm lens, which is the standard normal lens for a 35mm camera, and put that on your D700, you look through the viewfinder, you're going to see the same field of view that you would with a film camera. And if you ever decide to get into film photography, you're starting at a familiar place. Also, for the money, it's one of the best digital cameras you can buy. It was introduced in 2008, so it's 17 years old as I'm recording this, over 17 years old, but it's still an excellent camera. Just look on YouTube, look at reviews, not reviews from 2008. Look at what people are saying about that camera today. For some people, it is their primary camera, and it's a camera you could stick with for a long time. It has excellent low light performance, excellent color, it's extremely well made, it's very reliable, and it has the Nikon F bayonet mount. That mount was introduced in 1959 with the Nikon F, and many of those lenses can be used on the D700. In fact, the D700, you will be able to mount without any modification Nikon F mount AI and AIS lenses, most of the Nikon autofocus lenses in F mount. You could also mount the older pre-AI lenses if they are modified. Okay, they must be modified to work on an AI camera. You cannot mount a pre-AI lens that was not modified on the D700 or any Nikon DSLR. So you got to be careful about that. Make sure if you're buying lenses, you buy AI, AIS, or AI'd lenses, which means lenses that have been modified for AI. So why is that important for a beginner to be able to mount these older lenses? Well, I believe when you're starting out, even if you're starting out with a digital camera like the D700, that you should use a manual focus lens. A lens that obviously you have to focus manually, but also a lens with an aperture ring where you set the aperture manually, where you set the shutter speed manually, where you use, if it has a built-in meter, and of course the D700 does, you use the camera in a manual mode. Again, we're using the meter, you select the shutter speed and the aperture based on the meter reading. And digital cameras have multiple metering systems, but I suggest you use a metering system similar to what would be on a vintage film camera, and in Nikon's case, That's a center weighted metering. So basically then, you're using the digital camera like you would a film camera. And of course, that makes a transition. If you decide to go film, it makes that transition easy because you'd be using the film camera basically the way you use the digital camera. And also with doing that, you're learning a lot more. You're learning how to focus. You're learning about aperture. You're learning about depth of field. It gives you a great basics in photography that you could take with you. And even if you never go to film, even if you never buy a film camera and shoot film, that will help you. Those basics will help you as you advance in your photography. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, why Nikon? Why choose Nikon? Why not Canon? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, I'm a Nikon shooter. I've been a Nikon shooter for over 50 years. It's my preferred brand. But also, the Nikon F mount. As I said earlier, on the D700, you can use AI, AIS, Nikon manual focus lenses. You could use, of course, all the Nikon autofocus lenses except the lenses for the Nikon Z mount. You could even use the older lenses that came out with the Nikon F back in '59 if they're modified. So it gives you a lot of lenses to choose from. And if you ever decided to get into mirrorless, well, you could use those lenses with an adapter on mirrorless cameras, not just Nikon mirrorless cameras, but any mirrorless cameras. There are adapters to use manual focus lenses and some autofocus lenses dating way back from not just Nikon, but from Minolta and Canon and Pentax and others on a mirrorless camera. So that gives you a lot of options when it comes to lenses. So if you go with the D700 and decide later to get into film, well, you could pick up a Nikon F dating back to 1959 and use the same lenses. You could even mount the autofocus lenses that have aperture rings. Now, some of them don't. Some of them are known as G lenses, which do not have an aperture ring. But you could use any lens, almost any lens, in Nikon F mount on your D700, as well as that old Nikon F that you picked up. So when you go, if you do get into film, you don't have to worry about buying additional lenses. Now, Canon makes excellent digital cameras. They made excellent film cameras, excellent manual focus film cameras, and excellent autofocus film cameras. But when Canon went to autofocus in the mid-1980s, they changed their lens mount. And the old FD and FL lenses that worked on Canon's manual focus film cameras will not work on Canon's autofocus cameras, and vice versa. You cannot use EOS lenses for the Canon autofocus cameras on the older film cameras. So that's a big advantage for Nikon, I believe, because you could use all those lenses on your D700. Now, there are other Nikon digital cameras, of course, such as this D7100. It's an excellent camera, but it's a crop sensor camera. You could pick these up even for less money than the D700. Now, what that means when I say crop sensor camera, it's what Nikon calls DX. If you put a 50mm lens on this camera, well, it's going to behave like a 75mm lens. It's going to give you the field of view of a 75mm lens. And then if you do decide to go to film and you put that 50mm lens on the film camera, you look through the viewfinder, you're going to say, well, you know, what's wrong here? I'm seeing a wider view. So that's why I think for consistency, for ease of possibly switching, and also for the quality. A full frame sensor, in most cases, like the D700, is going to give you better image quality, especially in low light. In the description below, I will put a link to several videos I have done on the D700 in the past. Take a look at them. I compare it to more modern cameras, and this camera really holds up well. Now, I said you could get them under 400. I've seen them as low as the high 200s, just under $300. I think it's well worth it. And like I said, just pick up, if you're a beginner, pick up a 50mm lens. You could pick up manual focus Nikon 50mm lenses, very cheap. The one I have on this D700 actually is a pre-AI lens that was AI'd, so it works fine on the D700. It dates from the early 70s. Okay, it's a 50mm 1.4 lens, and you could pick up these lenses for $50 to $75. So you could get into digital photography fairly inexpensively, more expensive than film, but as I said earlier, you don't have the expense of film. So if you have any questions or comments on this video, please leave them in the comments below. I usually respond to all comments and questions. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I publish a new video every Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I will talk to you soon.